who's our expert today? We got 𝐿 with us. Yeah. Now, more and more I was reading about John, I became more curious, and I was just seeing that how well we connect. Let it be John's journey, our personal journey, and our property journey, how well it connects. And that's how when you say something out to the universe, it all comes together, it all gets connected. And that's precisely this is happening in 2022, the first month of the year, and we have John. So to share a little bit about John, he is born and brought up in Liverpool, but now he's settled in Wales. But he has traveled across the globe. Previously, he was working for retail industry, and he has traveled as a consultant and doing plenty of work. But at the same time, what he was doing specialized was designing, like he was working through product team, and then he understood the power of data. So decades back, he already discovered the power of data, and that's where he left his corporate career and he moved into property. But what he did is the skill what he has used to make other companies successful, he brought that skill into his own business, property business. And very quickly he realized that he's able to make a real difference in this industry. And then he started Ultimate Landlord Research, a company he pioneers, he founded. And through that company, he has helped thousands of people to find properties with the help of data and insight research, rather than just guessing, rather having gut feelings, and rather keeping away the emotions. So he is a man who's going to help us understand numbers in a most layman language. I have seen few of his recordings, few of his materials, and the book, he has wrote a book, which I will highly recommend. I will leave all that for John to share, because if I keep going on, that's not the purpose of this evening. So on that note, I will introduce John to the virtual platform of Project Possible. Over to you, John.
Oh, Gito, what an introduction. I don't know how to follow that, really. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody this evening for coming along to listen to me talk this evening. For me, it's just it's a privilege, an honor, and a pleasure to be able to talk to you about the work that I've done and the successes and the failures that I've had over the years investing in property. As Gito has mentioned, my business is Ultimate Landlord Research, and we really focus on property investing, which is why we're here tonight. We focus on property investing with data and with insight. And I think that's probably more important now than at any point in my property career. So I had a corporate career and I also have a property career. And I've never seen a time where there is so much risk and so much opportunity at the same time. So my talk this evening is going to focus a little bit on that, and we're going to really challenge our understanding of property in the UK, and also how we behave and how we work with property in the UK as well. So I mean, I see, and for those of you that have seen Trotter's Independent Traders, Rodney and Del Boy, that's really how our industry behaves. It's very much focused on making money, wheeler dealer, try and find an opportunity. Those sorts of things are really prevalent in the industry, and I find that quite unusual. And the reason I find that unusual is because I would expect that of a market trader or a small business or a startup, but I don't expect that of professionals like ourselves, who are spending hundreds of thousands and often millions of pounds on investments without any real knowledge or insight. I'm used to an environment like the one in this picture, one that's packed full of people who are analyzing and are understanding and trying to see the influences in a market to make good and strong and well-informed decisions. Now, that to me is the norm. And I expect my businesses and the businesses of those people that I work with to behave in a similar way. I think most of us have had an experience of working in a corporate or a structured business environment. And I would ask us to first of all question, do we behave like that when it comes to property investing? Because my view is, as an industry, we don't. And I seek to change that. But obviously with myself, I have been a property investor for a couple of decades now, on and off. I really took it seriously around about 7 or 8 years ago, and I really got into it in terms of building a portfolio for myself to support myself, my family, and latterly other people around me as well. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. And it's such a pleasure to hear Ghito talk about helping to solve homelessness, because quite often as property investors we get a bit of a bad reputation, particularly in the UK, perhaps less so elsewhere in the world, but certainly in the UK, we get a bit of a reputation for not necessarily caring about tenants. And in my world, and in the world of many people that I work with, nothing could be further from the truth. We actually really care, and we are part of the solution in the UK, not part of the problem. And so that's something that I'm on a bit of a mission. I have been on a bit of a mission for getting on for 8 years now to try and address. It was also mentioned that I worked in retail. I worked in retail for a couple of decades. I left university and I worked at Lidl, which is a discount retail operation. There I learned how to be productive, to have productive ways of working. I then went to work for a company called Summerfield, where I learned an awful lot about process and an awful lot about marketing and presentation. I then went to work for Spar. I was kind of headhunted by Spar actually, and I was brought in to re-engineer some of the things that they were doing in their business, and that basically led to me becoming part of the procurement team. And in the procurement team in Spar, I was trained to negotiate. And one of the things that I quickly learned in Spar is that I could negotiate by banging the desk and by being assertive, which would sometimes get results, or I could negotiate with data and with insights. And I found that always got results. So I became quite well known for being the guy that negotiated with spreadsheets and with data, as opposed to shouting at the person on the opposite side of the desk in a negotiation. So I built a bit of a reputation now, and I worked across the whole of the UK procuring goods and setting up contracts for that business, and then I did a little bit in Europe as well. And then I moved on to Sales Out, where I was again asked to come across and help Sales Out to help suppliers to negotiate. And that's again something that worked quite well. I grew that business quite significantly in conjunction with a leadership team to a point where it got bought out by IRI. And in IRI, I was responsible for data and insights for the whole of the wholesale part of the business. So that would be warehouse and what we would know as restaurants and on-trade establishments. So my job was to provide, and my team's job was to provide data, but not just data, actually the insights, and we'll come on to that in a moment, the insights in relation to what's happening in the markets where these brand owners and these manufacturers were trading, and also what's likely to happen in the future. So, I had many clients, but some of the ones that we'll probably be familiar with will be Coca-Cola, GlaxoSmithKline, Heineken, and many others. So quite a broad range of quite well-known sort of more blue chip type companies. But even there, and I was very happy at my job. I was pretty certain that there was something more that I was meant to do, and I took a decision to really ramp up my property investing, and I left IRI in 2015. So we're talking about 7 years ago now. And what I started then doing is building my own property portfolio. And part of that process was, as Ghito mentioned, insight. So insight and data, in my mind, should always lead strategy. We should never take any action if we don't have the information to hand and the data to hand to justify that action. And I'm very passionate about insight and data leading strategy in our industry, because frankly, there are so few people that do it. Now, as we all know, quite often we can be seen as rather unscrupulous and negative and unpleasant, particularly when it comes to the political landscape. So we've had quite a bit of a challenge over the last few years as property investors, but nevertheless, money has been made. People have been provided with great accommodation, and it's been a positive experience for a significant number of people in the UK. But it's not always perfect, and it's not always the way it should be. So this is the reason why I wrote my book, Property Truth or Dare. The reason for that was because I observed a lot of people taking risks because they felt they had to take action, and you hear that a lot. Take action now. Don't hold back. Do it, and that's not the way. That's not the way we should behave as business professionals. We should analyze where the opportunity lies for us based upon our business plan, and then act accordingly. So I wrote a book about that and about the truth really about investing in property from my perspective, and also the risks and the dares that we're encouraged to take, and try and take away the unknown element and focus on the some more factual and truthful element of the industry. My businesses today, obviously as already mentioned, I run Ultimate Landlord, and Ultimate Landlord provides research to the market. I produce market reads, so I provide forecasts for the UK market, and certainly over the last 2 years, we have forecast the market pretty accurately at a time when most other small, medium and large entities struggled to forecast the market correctly. And we'll come on to that in a moment. I've mentioned a book, and I obviously am also an active property investor. So even today, right now, I am still active. I am developing properties. I am acquiring properties, and I'm looking after properties at arm's length, admittedly, but I run my portfolio quite close. So I'm very close to what's happening in my portfolio. And that portfolio is diverse, and it's based in numerous locations across the UK. I'm often asked what I buy and what I focus on, what my strategy is. My strategy is to buy properties that will appreciate in value faster than other properties in a given area, and to generate the maximum possible cash flow I can from them. So I buy all sorts of properties to meet that strategy, anything from small flats to house shares, so HMOs, for those of you familiar with that term, house shares, houses of multiple occupation. I also buy commercial premises as well, and latterly I've also focused on land, and I'm just about to start a barn conversion as well. So I got a reasonably broad knowledge of most, as we would call it, strategies in property. But I don't want to talk about me for the rest of the night. I really want to talk about insight. Insight, as in terms of its definition, is the capacity to gain a deep and accurate understanding of someone or something. And the something that we want to understand is where the property market is, where we invest, and where it's likely to go. Now, in my experience, that tends to follow this trend. We have one side, which is opinions and experience, and believe me, there's plenty of that in our industry. And we also have evidence and data. Now, there's not a lot of that. Well, I say there's not a lot of that. There's actually is quite a lot of data, but it's not very easy to access and interpret. So the evidence side of data or insight is difficult to access. So most people spend their lives focused on qualitative data, what people did last year, people who made money, people who were successful, people who've decorated a house a particular way or developed the house a particular way. Whereas I spend most of my time, unusually, in the quantitative side. I look at what's happening in a city, what is most likely to work in a city, which areas of the city are likely to see a boom, and which areas of the city are likely to be really sort of middle of the road or not perform massively well, and which areas of the city are going to bust. They're not going to grow. And believe me, in the city or a county or an area, there will be winners and losers all of the time. And now the art for me is to find those areas where it's worth investing right now, and that constantly changes. So I live my life on the evidence and data side of the business, of the property business or the property industry. And I ask everybody that I speak to, are you mad? Think about what you're doing if you haven't got a data plan. Because in essence, what you're doing is you're playing a game of chance. If would you really think about going and spending 100 or 200,000 pounds of yours or somebody else's money on something that you don't have an understanding of, and you don't have any information about? If I said to you, go and spend some money in the stock market, you pretty much want to have some reports and some data to understand what you're investing in, which stock you should be investing in. What you certainly wouldn't do is drive to the factory or to the business and do a little walk around their office or their warehouse to try and work out if they're going to succeed or not. That's just not the way we should behave. That's something that I want us to try and understand and seek to develop within our businesses too. A bit of background about me. I just mentioned I grew up in Liverpool, and I always tell this story because you know, it's kind of important. You know, purpose was to, you know, sort of bring us up in a nice part of town, in a nice area. My mum and my father separated when we were quite young. My mum wanted us to live in a really nice part of town, and that was admirable, and that was her purpose. That's what she wanted us to do. The outcome though was slightly different because we were quite poor when I was younger. We moved into the top floor of this property, and it wasn't the most how can I put it? I mean, it was okay, but it was kind of like the worst property in the best area, and that created challenges and frustrations, and you know, the outcome for us wasn't necessarily as positive as we would have liked, and my mum would have liked. And later on, we moved to a different area where that wasn't the case. So, you know, we had it was the worst house in the best area, and that for me was something that you know, sort of gave me a steer as to what I wanted to do with my life and how I would like to behave. And I tell that story about what my family and my mum did, because, you know, my mum really she wanted the best for her children. Everybody does, but she was only she was a child herself, in essence. She was in her early 20s. She was dependent on everybody else's advice. She moved us, and it wasn't necessarily the right move for us. So, you know, she followed the experts, and the experts gave her advice, and that advice led to somewhere that we didn't want to live. And that's something that really, you know, resonates even today, sort of 40 odd years later. If she'd have had the insight and the data, she would have had a more effective strategy, I believe. And rather than depending on the people around her to give her advice, if she'd have done her own homework and looked for insights into the area and what was happening, she probably would have made some slightly different decisions. And we're all guilty of that. But I use that example. I apply that to what we're doing right now. So I want to talk today about sort of 5 key areas. I want to talk about what happened in 2020, how we understand change, misleading data, what the rest of 2021, what happened in the rest of 2021, and what's going to happen this year and beyond for us, and how we can play in that space. So the first thing I want to talk about is sentiment in the media. Okay. The sentiment in the media are dangerous things because they often take things out of context or don't understand themselves. So I always beware of opinions, and I'm very, very cautious when it comes to Bank of England advice and comment. Now, you'll see a lot of that over the coming months because there is some volatility in the market. Bank of England guidance and comment is often taken out of context and quoted out of context by the media. So you've got to look behind the headlines, and you've got to check the working out, because we cannot confuse scale and celebrity with accuracy. And I'll give you a few examples of why. So here's a website. They published some information last year about two major entities, the Bank of England and an estate agency, the largest one, Knight Frank. And you can see in 12th of May 2020, they published that they forecast the house prices would fall by 7%, and the Bank of England predicts a 16% decline. And that wasn't essentially the case. That was a part of a scale of possibilities. But the agent certainly thought, they were the experts, they thought the market fall 7%. And then just 2 months later, we have reports saying that UK house prices surged to an all-time high in August. So in the space of 2.5, 3 months, we go from disaster to, oh, hang on a second, the property market's performed really well. Not just one publication, there were several others. 7th of May, forecasting that it's going to decline, and then the Bank of England coming out a couple of months later saying the housing market is going to grow and is going to return to normal levels. And even that wasn't necessarily correct, but it was certainly more accurate than the doom and gloom that was being published at the time. And the critical thing here is none of this is insight. We all get clickbait. We all get headlines that will encourage us to read, and that's great. But none of it is actually based in relevant evidence. There wasn't a graph or a chart or a model anywhere in any of the stuff that was being put out in 2020. No quantitative data. Now, what we did, and we did a significant amount of research at the time when we were in our infancy in terms of starting up this research company, and we could see the orange side of which everyone else was seeing, which all of a sudden we were all locked down. The orange bars on this chart showing that house price growth was tipping negative everywhere, and we would expect that. Nobody foresaw COVID coming. But then if we fast forward, if we fast forward to later on in the year, when we get to Q3 and Q4 of 2020, we saw a rebound, we saw growth. So, we had significant, 7.5% growth in some regions, and almost every region by Q4 of 2020 tipped over into really positive growth, more than we'd seen in the 5 years prior to this. So we went from disaster, doom, gloom, don't do anything, sell your houses, don't invest, it's all going to collapse, bubble, all of the noise that you hear, to a situation where, for those of us that held property through that 2020 period, most of us made around about 4.5%, 5% on the assets that we held. So, in a disaster that like nothing we've ever seen before, certainly in my lifetime, the market performed exceptionally well, and people were confused. Thinking, well, why on earth is this happening? Because surely with a seismic effect like that, the property market will collapse and all of the noise that goes with it. But actually, what happened was we started to see an increase in the turnover of stock as we emerged from COVID. So normally, most estate agents in data, that we tend to find that they'll turn over about 10% of their stock every month. So of all the listings they've got, about a 10% amount of stock gets sold, and then that then gets replaced the following month by more stock. And what we were observing is that agent stock turnover was increasing with every passing quarter, and that for me demonstrated that there was stability in the market. Certainly, we were getting close to normal levels even during some sort of shock and some issues within the system in terms of people not being able to move around or go into shops and things. We also saw and observed that actually throughout the pandemic, household income held up. Furlough had a huge part to play in that. People's incomes did not decrease dramatically, and most of us were able to sustain household income and sustain making payments. So there was no major shock or major credit problems in the system either. And because of that, and because of that information, we were able to see and continue to do our affordability checks. And we found that affordability was not falling off a cliff either. We still had, in the case of rent, most regions of the UK remained affordable based upon the affordability criteria for renting a property. Most areas, London's an exception, admittedly, but most areas you could afford to rent, and there was actually headroom for rents to grow. Now, property price is slightly different, but even so, there was still, most people on an average income could go out and start in the property market in most regions and buy a 1 or a 2 bedroom property. Of course, we've got the Southwest and Greater London where there's the exception to the rule, but there's many. I could talk to you all night about that. But generally across the UK, properties remained affordable, although the media doesn't like to publish that. And because of all of this and a lot of other data that we did, we were able to publish a forecast in November 2020 to say, at the time when everyone else was saying the property market's going to crash, and all the experts were saying furlough will end and it'll crash, the stamp duty holiday ends and it'll crash, and all of that noise. And we just went, no, that's not going to happen. In 2021, we're going to see consistent growth each quarter. So that was the forecast that my business did in November 2020. So just coming up to 13 months ago. And I think we can all agree, if we take the blue line, that is house price change. And if we take the orange line, and that is rental value change, I think we can all agree that we were reasonably accurate. So we forecast 6.5% house price growth in Q1, 8.2% house price growth in Q2. I think it was about 4.3 for Q3, and then about 6.1 in Q4. Now, we haven't got Q4's data back yet for 2021, but the other 3 quarters, we were pretty much bang on in terms of house price growth. Now, the reason I did that is not because I'm an expert and I've been buying properties for 50 years, because I haven't. It's not because I've got the biggest property portfolio, because I haven't. It's not because I ran an estate agency and I knew everybody in the whole of the UK. I had a small estate agency. It's because I used data and the models that I've learned and I've taught myself and others. I was able to do that nationally and arrive at an accurate forecast as to what is likely to happen in the coming months. So that was quite interesting for me, because that demonstrated that not just on a local level where I invest, but on a national level, what we do is accurate. And I'll just draw your attention to this. It's something that I struggle to put into words, so I try and do it visually, but I appreciate this isn't so great either. But let me talk you through this. So on the one hand, we've got demand, and this is demand supply. This is basics in terms of economics. The demand key measures, which we measure in data, is in the green, and then the demand, and then the supply, which sort of calms the market and will reduce potentially any house price growth or inflation, is on the right. And you'll see, and I just wanted to just think about what's happened. So what are the employment situation like? Employment really held up, and in fact we've got an employment shortage in the UK. The attention the market was getting and continues to get was very much there. People's lifestyles were changing. Where people live and what they do was in flux. It was changing. Local demand was being reported and seen in data as well. Talked about turnover. The sentiment started to shift. So, you know, if we look at what was happening on social media and the measures we can get out of that, people's attitude was radically and quickly shifting towards, oh gosh, we've made a mistake, we need to buy some property. Affordability, even I've just shown in the graphs, affordability is not an issue in many parts of the UK. Well, I know we tend to focus on London and the southeast, but in most parts of the UK, actually property is very affordable and very much more affordable than perhaps we believe. There was a much better return on investment in the property market versus some other investment markets as well. And then the critical one in terms of demand is credit availability. Not only did it hold up, but it's actually becoming easier and more accessible for a lot of people, which is unusual because since the 2008 financial crisis, the credit market's been very tight and very difficult. So for the first time in a long time, we started to see a real relaxation in credit, and that continues even to this day. So we've already got the Bank of England looking at changing the affordability measures for mortgage lending in the UK, which will drive demand. And then I look at the supply. Are we building more stock? Absolutely not. Nowhere near keeping up with demand. The speed of sales began to slow, so it was taking longer because of all of the difficulties with COVID for transactions to go from offer to completion. So that further puts pressure on supply because it's taking longer to convert stuff. Number of listings continues almost every single month, with the exception of August last year. We saw listings per agent drop. So there are fewer properties that are coming to the market than are selling, which is a real nasty and dangerous position to be in when it comes to overall demand and pressures on prices. Well, say nasty and worrying. If you're investing, perhaps not so much. And then macro employment. So the employment situation, people are moving and they need homes, and there are businesses that are setting up in different locations, and offices are changing. That all puts pressure on supply at many different levels, particularly at a local level. And the population isn't changing, so it isn't going down; it's going up. So there's still more demand, still more pressure on supply. All that means for me, in most simple terms, is that I can't see at this moment in time an end to the pressure on house prices and property values in the UK. And I know I'll get criticised, and I know people will have different opinions, and I respect them. All I do is I report the data. I just look at all of these key measures, and I look at the trend, and I look at the historical trend, and I just report it. So what I believe is irrelevant. It's what I see in the data, and I report to you and to others that is relevant. And everything that I see in the data at the moment suggests and reports that there will be continued significant pressures upwards on property values. Now, as a property investor, that's a key part of what we do, isn't it? Because we're interested in house prices going up because we want our assets to appreciate in value. Particularly at the moment with inflation running at 6%, we certainly want to be making at least 6% on our properties. Now, I know that there's a lot of talk about, oh, well, properties are a bit too expensive, and I want to just try and debunk that a little bit. So this is, what we all know, house prices go up. Yeah, it's pretty obvious, and we can see the spikes there in the data as well, where we've had some problems in the past. But property prices continue to rise, and that's because simple just sort of growth and living in a type of economy that we have, which is based upon annual growth. And everybody gets very worried about house price change, and it's true, it has been quite spiky and volatile in the past. Certainly it would appear to follow some sort of a cycle, and people get very animated and excited about that and about how it changes. But at the same time as all this is happening, we also have wage inflation. People's annual salaries continue to increase in value or increase in amount. So yes, house prices have gone up, but so have salaries. Now the question often that's put to us all is, well, hang on a second, salaries aren't keeping a pace of house prices, and that's true. Now I know a lot of people think that houses used to be about 3 times an average salary. That's not the case. As a multiple of household income, historically, we've tended to be around 5.5 times the average household income. But certainly since the mid-2000s, that trend changed, and we went into a much higher multiple of income. It's actually somewhere around 7.5 to 8.5 times the average household income, which animates everybody because we say they're not affordable. But yeah, for me, I wonder, is that really true? We've been told what to think. Are we using the correct data? Is this just someone's opinion? I am more interested in how much people pay to service the debt, pay to service the mortgage that they have on a property. Because from a data perspective, that really matters. That really means how much money have people got left over after they've paid to own a property. So we can see house prices going, we can see wages going up there, and then we can also see what people were actually paying in interest on their mortgages. You can see there's quite a big gap there between what we were paying in interest to service debt and our incomes, or the average household income. And if we put that in percentage terms, you'll see that actually since around about 2008, we massively slashed the cost of servicing debt against the property. So what does that mean for us? That means that actually the truth is that the property market has been extremely cheap. It's been extremely cheap to own property in the UK for many years. The difficulty has been the barriers of access. You've not been able to access the credit to enable you to own your property. So that's made it harder for a lot of different sectors of society, particularly younger generation and first-time buyers. So is it about to crash? That's what's often asked. And again, we've got the spiky chart that scares everybody, and then everybody gets very animated over inflation. And there is a correlation, albeit it doesn't necessarily follow true that they're perfectly aligned in terms of timing. But when there's inflation in the market, house price inflation will kind of either happen before or after, not necessarily at the same time, but they generally will follow a bit of a trend following one another. And the other thing that's often mentioned is interest rates. Interest rate increases affect house prices. Now, I'm looking at this graph, and I've looked at it for years. I can't see a correlation between interest rate change and house price change. Certainly not when you put interest rates up, that house prices fall. Maybe there's a little bit of it. Certainly we had a bit of an issue in the late 1980s with a big spike in interest rates, but generally there's not really a correlation. The most important chart that I show people is the household debt to GDP ratio against house price change. So in sort of more simple terms, because it's just really complicated to go right away through that. In essence, if we take on more debt as individuals, as households, property values go up. Now, I know that sounds strange, but it's just, look at those charts. They're two different sets of data. Look at the trend. They are matching up one another almost step by step, year by year. The trend is there. You can see it quite clearly. When we take on more debt, our property values go up. Now, I don't need to remind you that over the last 2 years, we've been in COVID, and people have not been saving more. They've been taking on more debt, either to keep going, or because they just want to sort of enrich their lives, or there's changes in their lives. Debt's been part of it. And also nationally, as a nation, we've become more indebted too. And GDP, it's kind of static. So it means that we are seeing an increase well over 100% in terms of index. We're getting up to sort of 110, 115 on debt, and house prices are naturally following that, which is what they have done since 1979. And at the moment we start paying debt down, that's the point at which we'll possibly start to see a reversal in the demand for property in the UK. So it's not like 2008. it isn't the case that recessions drive a decline in assets. It isn't the case that interest rates will make changes will make houses more unaffordable. It isn't the case that stamp duty was driving demand, and it isn't the case that furlough would cause a house price drop. It was all nonsense. Okay, what we're actually seeing is this: we're actually seeing a rebalancing of growth by region. So historically, we've had Southeast and London. Now we're starting to see the other areas of the UK start to catch up, and that's perfectly demonstrated here. In a market that was growing at 6% or 6.5%, we're seeing some areas growing at 12%. Okay, so that was what happened in 2021, or what was happening in 2021. And also we've seen a rebalancing of growth by region. So we have, in 1997, not a huge difference between the most expensive areas of the UK and the least expensive areas of the UK. And by 2019, pre-COVID, we'd absolutely maxed out. There was a huge gap between those areas that are traditionally, or those areas that are cheaper, and those areas that are more affluent and more expensive. And that is starting to reverse immediately. So influences, so long-term cost of borrowing, that has a big impact. Increase in debt, that has a positive impact on property values, which sounds wrong, but I can't argue with the data. It's the fact. It's a fact. Job creation and transformation. So people are moving to different areas and changing their lifestyles at a rate which we've never ever seen. You know, the fact we're here today on Zoom, this was unusual just 3 years ago. This is the norm now. The GDP recovery and what happens with that is also something that we need to monitor. You've got to understand that this is the new normal. It's not going to revert back to the way it was in 2019 or 2018. This is the way the market is now, and we have to play in that market. And we've got to get past the fixation with this year versus last year. So we're going to see some really big growth over the next reported growth over the next 3 months. And that's because this time last year, we were all locked down again. We were all getting locked down again. So the annualization of that data skews the reporting. So we'll see house prices are out of control and all of that sort of stuff will be published again, but it's not the case. Okay. So just be aware of these influences. All right. I want to talk about inflation. This is important because inflation is something that is going to impact the property market. Now, this will be difficult for you to see, but we've got the consumer price index for homeowners, the consumer price index, and the out-of-home index in terms of inflation. And this was to May last year, so it's a little bit older than I would like, but we'll have some more data very soon. And what we've started to observe quite early on is that it's actually it's not affecting owner occupiers, so people who own properties, the inflation as much as everybody else. So owner occupier housing costs have not gone up. So it's not more expensive to own property, but everything else is getting more expensive. And we're getting all of this all these media publications, inflation rates, scary stuff, Brexit, it's different today from the 1970s. All this sort of stuff is just being put out there, and it's just noise. What really matters is what the ONS and the government are putting out. We definitely have an issue with costs. So if we look at producer, so this is things that are made, price inflation, it's through the roof. It hasn't been so high for over 10 years. It's really, really ramped up. So it's got much, much more expensive very, very quickly to produce. And at the time when I gathered this data in July, you could see we didn't have, most areas of manufactured products were in significant inflation, with the exception of petrol and food and a little bit of tobacco. So petrol, I'm sure we can all remember in the UK what happened in September. We had a petrol crisis, and petrol's got much, much more expensive very quickly. And also food is getting far more expensive as well, because we're ending contracts, excuse me, and the cost of producing and the logistics of making these food products available to us is becoming more difficult as well. And that really means we've got some questions to answer. Should we buy? Should we sell? Should we get rid of some stuff, or should we change our strategies? And these are all questions that we need to be able to answer. Wage inflation has grown significantly, although actual more broad inflation is catching that up. But basically, people have got more money in their pocket, and we know that housing costs, so owner occupier costs, are not rising at this moment in time. So those people that own properties or can own properties are not really being hit in the pocket as much as those that can't. So there is the capacity for them to continue to buy in the property market. And I put this graph in because it's quite important. This demand is just growing and growing and growing in many areas. I picked a random postcode area here. What you'll see actually is that demand is really high in some postcodes. So that's the dark green bar, but actual price change hasn't reflected in some areas price change, and that's because there's always a delay. So as demand increases in an area, the market takes a while to sort of respond to that, i.e. prices go up. So if I was investing in this area, excuse me, if I just looked at sold prices, price change of sold prices, I would be looking at the area at the far right hand side, NN1, because that's had one, I think it is one of the highest price changes in the last 12 months. But that's not relevant to us. What's relevant to us is demand, because frankly, I would be investing in NN2, which hasn't seen such a spike in house prices yet, but it has the highest demand. So we've got to be aware of that as part of our analysis and working with data as well. And for the reasons that I've said, so you can try and work all these out manually, yeah, if you really want to. But ultimately, it's the demand. If you can measure demand in what you do and how you invest in properties, if you've got a good measure for demand and you've got a good measure for supply, you can actually try and forecast on a local level which areas are going to perform best, because they're all, as we saw in the previous slide, which I'll just go back to, they are all performing differently. So that is the, I think it's Northampton area. There are some areas of Northampton that have grown at 14%, and there are some areas of Northampton that are actually falling in value, or were falling in value when I took this data. So I would much rather base my investments on the demand as opposed to what's happened to house prices. And that's a common mistake I see investors make. They don't consider the fact that price change is quite old and quite outdated. It's demand that matters. That's how we understand what's happening. I've already talked about the things that are going to be happening in the market over the course of this year. I'm not going to labor it. It's just, it's pretty obvious. I think I've covered it, but these are all things that are going to matter, not just in 2021, but they're mattering this year and beyond. These are big issues for us. Okay. Now, I now bring us back. That's sort of the national view, or the sort of the outlook of what's happening. But for me, what matters is what we do locally. Now, examples of typical investor plans that I see is we try and buy below market value. That is very difficult at the moment. All right, or below the advertised price. That's harder and harder and harder to achieve. We want to buy in high rent demand areas, because a lot of us want to rent properties out. We want to, if we're using finance, we want to recycle deposits, and we want to get decent yields and returns on investments. And these plans typically are fed information by the things in dark blue. So you want to go below market value, you go direct to an owner of a property, you go to auctions, you try and ask estate agents to help you out on your journey. Good luck with that. We also try and buy in high demand areas. So we look at word of mouth, we look at city stats, we look at something happening, we ask what the agents think. If we want to recycle our deposits, we think we've got to renovate to add value all the time. We've got to just keep adding value through really hard work. That is not the case. You can actually, and you don't always need to drive a hard bargain. And also, we look at doing interesting strategies, HMOs, service accommodation, adding rooms to properties, but more often than not, it's not fact or evidence based. Because it's not fact or evidence based, I just ignore it. It's just not relevant to me, because again, we're just playing this game of gambling. What matters to me is where and what I should buy. Right? I want to make sure that I am buying in the exact location, not Manchester or Liverpool or Swindon, but the exact postcode that performs best. Liverpool 19, Manchester M6, let's say. These are the things that I want to know. I also want to know what property type works best in this, because it's not always the same. Should I be buying apartments in that area that I've identified? Should I be buying 3-bedroom family homes in that area? What works best? What strategy works best? Also, how much rent it'll generate and how that rental market is performing. Even if I don't plan to rent it, it's still important for reasons I'll come on to in a moment. I quite like to recycle my deposits and my cash as well. And I want to know whether or not the market is going to go up or down, not on a national level, not on a regional level, but at a micro level, at the postcode and the property type in the exact location. Is that market in demand or not? And typically we get data like this. This is an example of a comparables report that I've pulled and I've got from an estate agent. But it's not really that relevant. None of that data tells me anything. And most of us want to do all of these things when it comes to finding a deal. We want to find portfolio landlords or reluctant landlords. People want to monetize property. We go for word of mouth. We try and link up with salespeople. We try and buy properties off dead people, which is always a challenge. And we just want to try and find people who will sell up for a price. But for me, what a good deal looks like is it's below market, and nowadays below where the market is going. All right, so you don't always have to get money off. I just want to make sure it's below where the market is going. So if I can buy in an area where there's high growth, then I'll probably be buying that at the right point in the market. I also want high rental yield and high rental demand. I want to be able to see the data, and I'm ideally looking for Goldilocks properties. And I'm conscious I may run over time, but I'll hopefully get a chance to show you some of the Goldilocks properties that I've managed to acquire and explain how I do it. Typically, you get data like this. This is, these are the city stats. These are the average rents in a city. But, as we all know, if we've had exposure to the property market, different areas of cities and regions perform differently. Is it the same? Does it apply to all property types? And is the data current as well? And data currency is really important. Now, if I try to look at sold prices in 2020 and compared them to 2019, that will be ludicrous because we were in a totally different situation in 2020. So what happened in 2019 would have been completely irrelevant to me. What I've also observed is that not all areas perform exceptionally well. Most areas will perform close to an average in an area or a city, but there'll be areas that underperform on the left-hand side. So there are areas that don't grow as much, and there'll be areas that overperform. And we saw that in those postcodes that I showed you earlier. There was one postcode area that was actually in decline, and there were some postcode areas that were growing at 14%. So, this is common all of the time across the whole of the industry, whole of the country. What I have observed and what I have measured in data, and this is critical. So if you've got your pens and your papers, make a note of this. It's really important. I teach it all of the time. We always see a spike or a growth in rent demand before we see sales grow. So the reason for that is in the UK, if you want to rent a property, generally the time from deciding to move in to take that property to moving into it is about 5 weeks. It takes about a month basically for you to go, right, I want to move to this area and I want to rent that property. If you wanted to buy a property right now in the UK, it'll take anything between 3 and 6 months. So if there's a sudden demand for people to live in an area, people suddenly want to move or live in an area, and they suddenly want to live in a particular property type in that area, I can always see that in rental demand before I see it in sales demand. So for those of you that look like measuring markets and looking at information about local markets, stop looking at sales, start looking at the rent demand, because that tells me if a new factory has opened up or a new school has opened up or a new hospital has opened up, and it's suddenly caused an influx of people and an increase in income or affluence in an area so people can pay more, I will see it in the rental market before I see it in the sales market. It's very critical, that. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is another set of data that I pulled. This is more recent, actually. This is just in the final quarter of last year. This is Cardiff postcodes. Look at the amount of demand there is in some areas. 85% of stock is turnover. Bearing in mind that most agents pre-COVID would turn over about 10 to 15% of their stock a month. In CF35, across all agents, more than 80% of their stock was selling each month. They're running out of stock. And you'll also notice the orange bar, which is price change. You'll see that most areas, or many areas, if you pardon me, outperform CF35. And look at CF33, it's got one of the lowest growths and one of the highest demands. So there's no prizes for guessing which area is likely to perform better moving forward, which one is going to have the higher house price change over the coming 3, 6, 9 months. It's the one that's got the most demand and has had the least growth. So it's simple stuff, this. It's easy to do. But you have to be disciplined and you have to do it. Okay. Now, all of that's very difficult. I worked very hard and I haven't quite got this ready yet, but I have got a product that helps you to see that type of information in a dashboard for yourself. So I am about to launch this product for testing. If you would like to test the product, there is a QR code on the screen now and a URL there where you can register to trial a piece of software, a platform where I can give you an automated version of that analysis so that you can see it in real time. Now, The other question is what drives rent demand. So I've talked about, something might happen in an area, a new train station, a new hospital, some big business moves to an area, or people are just attracted because of a school. And we've also talked about the fact that different areas grow at different rates, and the fact that I can see rental growth or decline before I see house price growth or decline. So one will follow the other. House prices will follow where rents have been. And I'm conscious I've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to hopefully rattle through this and tell you how I've made some money with data. So it's my leverage and strategy. So this is a property that I bought a couple of years. Just disclaimer, these are all pre-COVID or just in the first stage of COVID. Okay, I bought this property. I analysed the market and I found that this property was in an area where there's a shortage of 3-bedroom properties. Lots of 2-bedroom small properties, not so many 3-bedroom larger properties. There was also a huge spike in rental demand in this area, but the house prices haven't moved yet. So I was able to get a really good purchase on this property. I got it for £45,000. It didn't sell at auction, so I put a really firm offer in on it, and I managed to get that accepted. I spent £16,000 renovating it, and it was then worth, and some extra expenses. It stood me £69,000. That's what I put into the deal. At the exit 6 months later, I had it revalued at £120,000. It was a 3-bedroom property. I put a partition wall up and decorated it, made it look nice. So I made a significant increase in the value of the property. Even after I'd remortgaged it, I still pulled £21,000 out of that property. So significant uplift in value. I'm also quite averse to too much work. I like the idea of passive income, which is where we started this conversation this evening. So I like to buy properties and not have to do anything. So I bought this property in an emerging market, exactly as I've described to you this evening, where there was an increase in rental demand and property values weren't moving. No one else was buying in this location, very few. I bought this thing for £57,000. I spent £120 renovating it. I needed to fix some tiles. That's all I had to spend. I had a tenant ready to move in. I got it revalued a few months later at £82,500. So I made a significant jump in value. It happened very quickly, the sudden rush to buy properties in this area, but I was in first. So not only did I buy this property, I got all my money out on a mortgage, plus I had a little bit left over as well. So £25,000 of equity growth on that property. I also bought HMOs as well. For example, of some HMOs that I bought, I just repurposed them, and as again you can see, the equity growth on that one property alone was £87,000. Now, I'm not one to try and reinvent the wheel, so I actually bought the one next door as well, so you can multiply the equity growth by 2. So I remortgaged those and still had £44,000 left over after I'd bought them. So, cash wise, for those of us that are focused on cash and generating cash to continue to invest and momentum invest, there was £90,000 out of those 2 properties that I was able to reinvest. I like big properties. These are single let properties. This was an area that I identified. There's loads and loads of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom, small, high volume sort of property, and not an awful lot of larger properties. Yet it was near a hospital, and our hospital was expanding, so there was a need for larger properties for families to live in. So I went right in and bought some 4-bedroom properties. And I also noted in data that there was a huge gap between a not so well presentable property and a property that suits the market. So, modern kitchen, modern bathroom, decorated nicely inside, all fresh and ready to go. So I bought that for £75,000, and I got it revalued at £170,000 after spending £25,000 on it. So I made £65,000 of equity growth. I also buy small properties as well. Is this example of some cottages that I bought? Similar story again. This was an up-and-coming area. I found it before anyone else. I invested in this area. I even phoned the estate agents up and said, look, this is getting a bit silly. I can't believe how cheap these properties are. If you get any more, let me know. And because I'd said that, they then set about increasing the asking prices on their properties. So that meant that by virtue of the fact that I'd told them they need to start increasing the value or the price of properties, I benefited from that because the whole market increased in value as a result. So I copy and paste. I just did exactly the same thing again down the road as well. And just in 18 months of investing just in that side of my business, excluding the commercial stuff and all that sort, all the other things that I do, I got all of my money back on it. Every penny that I put into those properties, I got back plus £166,000. And it's not a lot of property, is it? So, you know, this is really doable, and this is all through data. So again, you've got lots of data sources. You can use Gumtree, you can use the Freedom of Information Request, you can use Facebook, use ONS, and you can use us as well. As I've mentioned, we've got services to support you. My contact details are there. You can contact me. Please don't all rush to ring me at once. Do try and drop me an email or contact me on Facebook. I prefer that. And I've also got a YouTube channel as well, where you can see some of the latest videos and latest stuff that we've been up to, and some great chats with people as well. And it's really important to remind you that insights and data lead strategy. So, you know, it's critical. It's critical now more than ever. And because of that, I want to just give a few things away this evening. So if anybody wants a copy of my market read, I will, disclaimer alert, the next version of my market read is not being published until the end of next week. So if you download it now, you'll be getting, it'll still be relevant, but bear in mind that there's a new one with exactly the same link coming out at the end of next week on Friday. You can also get a copy of my book if you want to. You can go to Amazon and buy it, $17.99 on Amazon, but I think there's a deal running at the moment. And also you can get, if it's to be delivered to the UK, if you've got a UK address where we can deliver it to, you can get a copy of my book for free. Okay, so if you want to have a free copy of my book, get your phones ready, because there'll be a QR code in a moment. And I also do regular meetings. You can join me on a weekly call if you'd like to. There's also one-day data workshops that I run every month, where you can learn how to improve your data knowledge and apply it in your business. And I also do an intensive insight boot camp for property investors that really want to go to the next level. If any of those things are of interest to you, I hope you've got your camera to hand, because I've got some QR codes for you. Those QR codes will give you those things for free. There's no commitment or anything like that. The only thing is you have to pay the postage and packaging on the book, but you can download the market read for free. You can find out more about my data workshops for free as well. No obligation to do anything. I don't really like hard sales. I'd rather people make an informed decision. So do feel free to capture those codes and get the information that you may need. It's simple enough. Hold your camera up at the screen, and it should open up a web browser for you. I will put those links in the chat box in a short moment as well. As I said, I got the ultimate property acquisition workshop, the one-day thing that I do. We've actually got one running on Saturday this week. It's on Zoom. So if you'd like to join that meeting, that workshop, feel free to do so. But I would encourage you to just look at some of the stuff that I've done first before you take the step to spend money on any training or workshops with me, please. And there's dates in January and April for those. And a little bit earlier on in the presentation, I mentioned that I've got some of this stuff automated for you. So if you don't want to go and do all the analysis yourself, and why would you, I suppose? And at the moment, you just want to get a feel for how you're performing, the areas that you've been looking at. If you want to just see and look at some other areas, grab that QR code and register for the launch of Ultimate Property Dashboard, because that'll give you the insights in real time, and it'll be updated every week for you. And it pulls a load of other interesting stuff in as well. I haven't got time to go right through it right now, but I would encourage you to register, because being the first to access that will put you ahead of the competition. I have run over, so I do apologize for running over a little bit. I'm going to cut off all of this sort of stuff. Again, just a reminder, ultimatelandlord.com resources for anything that I do or anything that my business does. But I think you've got that QR code a little bit earlier on. Reminder that insight and data lead strategy. My business is Ultimate Landlord Research. It's been a real pleasure presenting to you this evening. I started off a bit negative, talking about how bad things are, and like when I was a child and how things didn't work out so well for us. Look, it actually worked out really well for me in the end. So I managed to buy the home this is the day that I got the keys to my home. The nets have gone in the curtains. It's a little bit more presentable now, but I bought my dream home in 2013. Something that I'd always wanted. My children have grown up and enjoyed this property, as is my family. So I'm very proud of that. That was delivered by property investing, not by my employed income. It was only through my property investments that I was able to get this property. And not only that, but my mum, Again, I was able to help and support my mum. My mum lives nearby. We managed to get her a nice property in a nice part of town as well. But that was because we used the data. It's not because of what anyone told us. We worked together as a family to deliver what we want for ourselves, but also what other people want as well. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be able to help not just myself, but also my mum and my wider family, and also the people that work with me as well. So I wanted to end on a bit of a positive, the positive ways in which property investing with data can affect your lives and the lives of other people. And with that, I will hand back to Jito, and thank you again for listening to me this evening.